Hi everyone and welcome to my latest video. So in my previous video, I looked at import consoles and games, and I explained about which consoles are region free, allowing you to play a game released anywhere in the world on any console. Also at which consoles are region locked, meaning that only a game of the same region as the system itself will run. And I looked at every major console from Nintendo, Sega, every PlayStation, the Neo Geo, PC Engine, and Xbox. And so, as I said in my last video at the end, I want to this time around give you some information about buying import games in Japan. Of course, with the internet, we can find games from Japan online, and it's possible to buy a game either from Japan or buy a Japanese import game from someone not in Japan but who has that particular Japanese game themselves. But in this video, I want to look at buying games in Japan itself. So, as I mentioned in my introduction video to my channel, I have spent a number of years living in Japan where I worked. Now, my work in Japan has consisted of working with the church, teaching people about the Bible, and also in education, specifically in English language teaching. And so I have taught children, teenagers, adults, the elderly, many people who wanted to learn English. And in addition to living and working in Japan, I've also traveled quite extensively across various different parts of the country. And when I'm in Japan, both for work and now when I go to visit family and to travel and just enjoy spending some time there, I also like to shop specifically for games and consoles. And so in this video, I will give some information about shopping for games and systems in Japan, what I have learned over 15 years of living in, traveling back and forth to the country, of traveling around different parts of Japan and what is different, what has changed over time in regard to shopping for games and consoles and so on. Now, in my last video on import games and consoles, I looked in detail at each major console from each major manufacturer. And I discussed which of those consoles are region locked and which are region free. So if you want to know about that in general, if you want to know about a specific system and whether it is region locked or region free, I would encourage you to watch my video on that topic. One easy way to remember, at least in terms of portable systems, is that every portable system released by every major company is region free aside from 3DS. So Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, DS, and also the Virtual Boy are all entirely region free. Also, Game Gear is region free, Neo Geo Pocket is region free, and Sony PSP, and Vita are all region-free. So really, the only console in terms of portable systems which is not region-free is the Nintendo 3DS. Also, the Switch is a home console and a portable console, and it also is entirely region-free. As for all of the other home consoles, it's really on an individual basis as to which are region-free or region-locked, and I cover all of those in my previous video, so take a look. Now, one useful thing to know is that all controllers are region-free. So this applies to all controllers for all systems of all regions. Basically, if you can plug it into the system, it works on that system. I just want to speak a little about condition of games in Japan, because in my opinion, most items that you will find in Japan will be in mint condition. In Japan, I notice that many people seem to take care of their items, as I often see portable systems with mint condition screens, games with no scratches or damage, and often with all of the little booklets included. Now, occasionally you will find some items which are in decent condition but have some, for example, maybe a dent to the side of the box, or some booklet or something missing. In those cases, I have found that usually these kinds of items will have some discount. So, for example, there will be a sticker on the package which says 10 or 20% off, and gives some explanation as to what is not included to account for the discount. Now, one thing which is a large exception to this trend is that some items for sale in Japan will be labeled as junk, and usually not the game itself, but it will be either the system or controller. And if you see something labeled in this way, it generally means that the item has some flaw. So the item may not work at all. A console which is just broken and doesn't turn on, doesn't play games, and so on, or it is an item with a defect in some way that might work, but just not work to the full standard. So for example, it could be a portable console which has some damage to the screen, or it could be, for example, something like a DS where the hinge holding the two parts of the console together is broken, or it could be a analog stick not working, or drifting, or buttons not working, that kind of thing. As I said, in my experience, it's not common to see a game labeled in this way, but sometimes I see a console or a controller which is listed as junk. And if it is, the price will usually reflect that. So, for example, I have seen, for example, a Super Famicom console sold for 500 yen, or maybe a controller I've seen controllers for sale for like 200 yen, which is like £1 each. And I'm putting the word junk in Japanese here in my video, so you will recognize it when you see it. If you're not sure and you want to ask someone in a shop in Japanese, junk is pronounced like jank, so you can ask, janku desu ka? Or kore wa janku desu ka? Which is like, is this junk? And they will explain to you either way. In Japan, the capital city is Tokyo, and sometimes in the capital of a particular place, things are more expensive than maybe in a smaller city or in the countryside. But I think that in Japan, there isn't a huge discrepancy in price, whether you are in somewhere like Tokyo or somewhere less populated and not as well known. So, for example, Tokyo is the capital city, and so I have become used to the price of items there. Also, in Tokyo, there is a part of the city known as Akihabara, or Akiba for short. And while as a very popular and now well-known area to both to Japanese and gamers overseas, I wouldn't say that Akiba is much more expensive than elsewhere in Japan. Yes, there are some shops in Akiba which have higher prices, but it's also possible to find games in Akiba for less and for a price similar to what you would find in other parts of Japan, which are not as popular or widely known as Akiba or Tokyo. And if you go to a chain store, which is in various parts of Japan, this will be the same price whether you're in Tokyo or somewhere smaller. Now, Akiba is sometimes known as Akihabara Electric Town, which is a reference to it being a hotspot for electronic goods. But actually in Osaka, they have an electric town also, which is known, well, the part of Osaka that it's in is officially known as Nippon Bashi, which means Japan Bridge. But more informally, this particular electric town area of that district is known as Den Town. And in Japanese, den can mean electric. And so Den Town is a reference to that. So whenever I lived in Japan, I spent most of my time in two different parts of the country. One part of where I lived was in Kansai, West Japan, which is where Osaka is. But I also lived in and have spent most of my time in Sapporo, which is the major city in Hokkaido, which is the large island in the north of Japan. Now, Sapporo, I would say, similar to somewhere like Kyoto or Yokohama, Nagoya, Kobe, Fukuoka, and so on. None of these places have a part of the city which has a large number of game shops. similar to Tokyo's electric town or Osaka's Den town. Instead, in most cities in Japan, you are, when looking for games, mostly going to find large chain stores positioned just around the city. And as I said earlier, with prices similar to what you would find in Tokyo or Osaka. Also, it is possible to find games in Tokyo outside of Akiba, in places such as Shibuya, Shinjuku, Ikebukuro, Ueno, and so on. It's just that there is a particularly large concentration of them in one specific part of Tokyo. So I do want to look at specific shops and give you some information about which are cheaper and so on. But before I do, I just thought I would give you just a general overview of the price of both systems and games compared to over recent years. So I would say that in general, the price of retro consoles is more now than it was. For example, I think that the price of a system such as the GameCube is now higher than it used to be, and also something like the DS is also a little more expensive. So really it depends. Sometimes you might find a console for less than it is in the UK. Sometimes it might be around the same price. But I do think that prices are now a little more than they have been when I've been to Japan. And in some cases, I would say that you could actually find some system for less in the UK than the price in Japan in some places. So it's just something to be aware of. Sometimes you can find a bargain. Sometimes the price will just be comparable to what you already are used to. Now, I would say that when it comes to the games themselves, it's different for different types, different categories of games. So I would say that any retro games which generally have been inexpensive are now still inexpensive. I haven't seen a large increase, a large change in price. If a game was cheap before, it's still cheap now. Whereas I noticed that for some retro games which have been a little more expensive, they are now more expensive than before. There are games which I remember that I bought in Japan, and now they have increased to double or triple the price. So I do think that overall the trend in Japanese games is that generally things are going higher. Some are around the same if they were cheap to begin with, but those which were a little more, those games are now becoming even more expensive. And I've noticed also that games in a series which is popular overseas is also getting more expensive. So an example is Pokemon. I remember a while back I bought the original version for the Game Boy of red, green, and yellow in the box, and they only cost around 500 yen each, which is about £2.50. But now those games sell for around 12,000 to about 18,000 yen, which is about £60 to £90. So I think what has happened is that in Japan, the seller have noticed that Pokemon is popular and that many tourists like it, so they have put the price up. Also, recently there is a big boom in tourism in Japan. When I was there just this summer, I noticed that there were more tourists than I have seen before. So there are more tourists shopping for games and buying them. Now, one thing is that for if you want to buy for modern games, for current consoles like Switch or PlayStation 5, they are very affordable for British travelers. So at the moment, as £1 is about 200 yen. In Japan, a new game releases from anywhere from around 3,000 to 7,000. Although on average, I would say most games are around 5 to 6,000. So that means that most games are going to be from 25 to 30 pounds, sometimes less, sometimes more. And there are some big chain stores which sell electronics and appliances for your home, which sell games. Now, these shops include, for example, Yodobashi Camera, Bic Camera, Joshin, and so on. Now, these shops mostly sell new games for the modern systems. So you will pay full RRP there. If you do buy something new at full price, I think that you still would generally get a Switch or PS5 game for less than in the UK. Now, in addition to games for current systems being inexpensive, the Switch console itself is very affordable in Japan. For someone in the UK, you can buy a brand new Switch for about 30,000, which is about £150, and that's for the OLED version. Switch Lite is about 20,000, which would be about £100. And if you are buying used, it's about 5,000 off each of those, so about £25 off each. For PlayStation, it isn't as much of a discount, as recently the PlayStation 5 has had a price rise up to 80,000 yen in Japan, which is around £400. And the PS5 has had a price increase a number of times in Japan. So it's still a little less than it is here, but not as much of a difference as with the Switch. So that covers the price of new consoles and games. Now, if you want to buy new and used games, retro and modern, there are chain stores, and there are also some small independent shops. So firstly, I want to talk about Geo. Geo is a chain which stocks new games and also stocks secondhand. And with the used stock, they go back to around the 7th generation, which would be the Wii DS and the PS3. Now, in my opinion, Geo are the cheapest if you want to buy used games. So, for example, if you want to buy for the Switch, I think that they have the best price for used games. Although, if you want to sell to them, I think their trade in credit is a low. So, I would sell elsewhere. Now, the next one I want to look at is Book Off, is a chain in Japan which sells games, and they sell new and used, and they go back to the 8-bit era. I think that they cost more for used games, and if you sell, their trade in price is very low. Sometimes they only offer pence for games. So I would say don't sell at Book Off and only buy there if what you want is unavailable everywhere else. Next shop I want to talk about is one called Surugaya, which is a chain which goes all the way back to the 8-bit era and stocks Nintendo, Sega, PlayStation, and things like the Neo Geo, PC Engine, Wonder Swan. Now, I would say their prices aren't as low as Geo, but they're not far off, and I think their trade in value is better. Now, in terms of overall stock, they would be the best because they cover many consoles. And with price, they're pretty close to Gale. Now, those are the main chain stores. In terms of independent shops, the main ones in Tokyo would be Trader, Retro Game Camp, Super Potato, and Beep. Now, like Surugaya, they stock all systems, and the stores themselves are like museums. You can find shelves high full of famous and obscure games. You can find rows of valuable retro items on display in cabinets, even some sealed. You'll find very narrow aisles where only one individual can just squeeze through. You'll hear chip tune music playing through the store sound system. You'll see various screens with old retro consoles connected, playing games around the shop. And you'll also see many posters and pieces of game art all over the walls. So even if you aren't there to buy, it's, I think, worth just having a browse, having a look around, and just enjoying the feel of being in some of these shops. First, I'll cover Trader. Now, this is a store which is in Akiba, and I would say that the price of items would be similar to Surugaya. Not maybe not as low as Gale, but decent. And also, they have modern games in stock with retro, while most of these small shops or independent shops would be more on retro. There are two branches of this store in Tokyo, both in the same area in Akiba. Next is Super Potato, which I think is the most famous game shop in Japan. I think that in Super Potato, the prices are high. I would say among the most I've seen in Japan. So I do think that the shop is nice for a look around as like a little museum. But I do think you would be best making most of your purchases elsewhere. And also that there are two branches of Super Potato. They're both in Tokyo. One is in Akiba and one is in Ikebukuro. Next is Retro Game Camp, which there is just one of also in Tokyo, in Akiba. I think it is also worth a look. And one thing they offer that every shop I mentioned doesn't is that they actually allow you to sell to them if you are not a citizen or living in Japan. You can sell to them as a tourist, but most shops, whether they are chain or smaller indie, will require either a passport, a Japanese passport, or a resident card for Japan. Last, I want to just mention Beep, which is also in Akiba. Now, Beep is a retro shop which has a focus on computers, Japanese computers. They have some console games, but not as much as those which I have mentioned. Now, one important thing to know if you are shopping in Japan as a traveler is that the chain stores offer a tax-free benefit. So if you show your passport, when you spend 5,000 yen, you don't pay tax. So you can get 10% discount. For small shops, independent shops, it just depends. Some offer tax-free, some don't. And if you want to use this tax-free service, just ask when you walk up to the counter prior to the staff beginning to process your order. In Japan, in general, tax is 10%, and sometimes tax is included in the display price, and so you will either pay that price or you will pay less if you use this discount. Or sometimes it will show two numbers, so you will see the price for tax and then with tax. So if you're not sure, you can ask. I think that in Japan, customer service is excellent and staff are very keen to help, to answer questions and to make sure you get what you are looking for. As for whether the staff speak English, this really is just on a case by case basis. Sometimes in a shop, maybe in a big city, they might know some English, but it really just depends. If you want to check, you can either ask in English, do you speak English? Do you know English? This kind of thing. If you want to ask in Japanese, you can say ego, which is English. So ego or wakarimasu ka, which means do you understand English? Or you can say ego or hanasemasu ka, which means can you speak English? So I'll say those both slowly, just so you can check pronunciation. So the word for English, ego, is eigo. And then if you want to say understand, is wakarimasu, wakarimasu, with ka at the end to make it a question. Or you can say eigo hanasemasu ka, hanasemasu ka, which means can you speak English? Also, if you're going to ask a question, I would suggest beginning by just saying sumimasen, which is excuse me. So in full, it would be sumimasen, eigo hanasemasu ka? Or sumimasen, eigo wakarimasu ka? So I hope you've enjoyed your Japanese lesson. And just as I finish, I also remember that Surugaya actually will ship overseas from Japan. So if you go to the Surugaya site, you can actually place an order with them. Now, there's something useful to know, which is that, yes, Surugaya do charge shipping if you want an item sent to you, but they offer free shipping at times, which is shown on the front page of the site when that offer is available. And from what I see, that offer is on very often, usually like once every week or every few weeks. So if you want to buy something from them, when you check if that offer is not on, just wait a few days, take a look again. I would say just place your order when the free shipping offer is available. I think there's, rather than pay 4,000 for shipping, if you wait a short time, you should get it for free. All in all, then that pretty much covers it for shopping, for games and consoles in Japan. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and if it has, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. Also, if you have any questions about whether it's to do with games or Japan or Japanese itself, just let me know in the comments. And I appreciate you watching this far. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you find what I've explained useful. So I'm looking forward to next time. But until then, everyone, take care. God bless.